right. Cool. All right. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jessie Becker Alexander. I actually grew up in Sacramento and Wilton until I went to college at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and then spent some time in the Bay Area once our startup got going, and I'm back kind of new in town as of late last year. So it's been really fun to get to know the Sacramento startup community after having been gone since 2007 or so. I hear all the time that it's changed a ton in the last 5 years, and it's certainly changed a ton since I was in high school. Yeah, so I guess with that said, I put together a little bit of a really quick slide deck so that there'd be some more visual interest than just looking at me in my family room for this happy hour. So I will run through that really quickly as a way of introduction of my the company that I founded and myself, if that works for everybody.
Sounds great.
Cool. And alrighty. So I founded with my co-founder Nathan Bear, Alydia Health, which at the time we called it Impress Technologies, in 2011. And we have always been really focused on making childbirth safer, and really focused on eradicating all of the mortalities and morbidities that go along with childbirth, and specifically focused on postpartum hemorrhage. Like Jeff said, postpartum hemorrhage is the number one cause of maternal death worldwide, and it's just as much an issue here as it is all around the world. So just a quick few key points. 1 to 2% of mothers have a blood transfusion after delivery. At least 10% will be diagnosed with postpartum hemorrhage, and there's actually quite a few more who have significant bleeding after childbirth. And 75% of mothers have risk factors for postpartum hemorrhage. And one of the crazy things to realize is that in the United States, childbirth is actually dangerous compared to some of the developed countries in the world. It's actually safer to deliver in China or Saudi Arabia based on some of the facts from the CDC. And so I guess diving into what is postpartum hemorrhage. Hemorrhage is really simply defined as excessive bleeding following childbirth. Some more facts here, but essentially what hemorrhage is after a baby is born and the uterus is too tired to contract, that's actually what causes the majority of hemorrhage. Normally when you think of PPH, when you think of any sort of hemorrhage, you think of some sort of laceration or major trauma. But in the case of postpartum hemorrhage, it's generally simply because the uterus is too tired to contract to its correct postpartum size. And what happens is the blood vessels and the uterine musculature, the fibers of the uterus don't contract down, and that leaves the blood vessels open and dilated and flowing with blood. And that's generally the cause of postpartum hemorrhage. So, today hemorrhage is treated with uterotonics, so drugs to help the uterus to contract. It's treated with a device that's out on the market that's essentially a balloon that applies pressure to the inside of the uterus. And if that doesn't work, they go to major invasive surgery. Normally, when you hear of a woman having an unexpected emergency hysterectomy following childbirth, it's because of hemorrhage and they couldn't stop the bleeding. So what our solution is incredibly simple. It's a device. This is a simple diagram of it. The device is inserted. There's a sealing balloon that creates a sealed cavity, and then a light vacuum force is actually applied. And that light vacuum force collapses the uterus onto itself and provides tamponade, and also helps the uterus to contract to its correct postpartum size. So it's really simple. And back in 2014, we had our first clinical case, and that study was published in the Green Journal, which is the American, for OBGYNs, that's the journal that they look at in the United States. So that was published in 2015. And since then, we've treated a total of 130 patients here in Uganda and in Indonesia as well. And it's gone really well. So we're very lucky actually to close out our most recent clinical study in the United States before COVID shut down all of the research capacity of hospitals. So really, really lucky to be able to get our last patients in before that started. And we'll use that information to actually apply for FDA approval. Yeah, so I guess high level, we founded the company in 2011. I was the founding CEO from 2011 to 2016. Our team went full-time in 2013, and over the course of several seed rounds of convertible notes, Series A, Series B, raised upwards of $15 million. And like I said, conducted clinical studies in Uganda, Indonesia, and the United States. And we're getting close to our FDA submission, which is going to be a really big deal for us. And yeah, that's that. That's like the really high level. Hopefully that was helpful as a way of introduction.
Sure.
And Jeff, if I missed anything or went too fast with anything, please, let's just dive in.
So I guess the first question that comes to my mind is, you had kind of a two-part. If you had any experience with entrepreneurship prior to this, and you knew you wanted to be a startup founder and go that route, or was it kind of a personal motivation, inspiration that inspired you to do this, or that of your co-founder that kind of led you down that path to solve the problem?
Yeah, good question. I guess I would say that my family has quite a few of them are small business owners, so that, you know, that's never been really foreign to me. And when I was in school, I studied business and I concentrated in entrepreneurship, mostly because I thought it was just the most interesting and most applicable and could be applied to basically anything. It was most flexible in that way, and I really enjoyed that thought process. But I was never one of the students who came into school, you know, just wanting to start something. Like, that was not my motivation. I came across this technology and kind of just fell in love with what it could do for the world. And, you know, from there, just, if no one else was going to do it, I was going to. So that's kind of how it started. Yeah.
So, and I've heard that medical devices are kind of a longer term development process. So I'm kind of curious how that development process played out for you, because you need to get FDA approval, I assume.
Right.
So how did that whole developing an MVP and validating the market play for this a medical device, for those who may not know?
Yeah. So it's much different than a lot of the, you know, a lot of the software-based startups where you can basically whip up an MVP and get feedback on your actual product, your first iteration of your product in a month's time, right? But that doesn't mean that there's not great ways to go get feedback for what you're working on. So to start, we were lucky in that the concept for this device came from was actually a national design competition from basically sponsored by the Gates Foundation that says, how can we better treat postpartum hemorrhage inexpensively? And so right off the bat, we know we have a problem that's worth solving because the Gates Foundation has defined that for us, right? And then the solution, the actual concept of using vacuum in the uterus was what we really needed to validate really early on. And we did that with really simple models. I think our first prototype was basically supplies we found at a party store, and put together, and so that we could demonstrate that the concept worked and have something to show doctors, and say, this is how we think it would work. And I think a lot of our early validation came from interviews with OBGYNs, and thoroughly understanding the treatment process for postpartum hemorrhage, right? Everything from how do you identify that a woman has bled too much, to what are your next steps, to what are the pain points in that process. So early on, we were able to really build a lot of information and data and understanding around that entire, that entire moment in time, right? That emergent moment in a labor and delivery ward, and get feedback on the device itself. And then, of course, there's bench testing, animal testing, clinical testing, all of those steps that take years to go through, in order to be able to get approval with the FDA.
Mm-hmm. But the idea, it sounds like you came across the idea through the Gates Foundation. You came across the technology, and is that right?
So the concept for the technology was actually a biomedical engineering student at Cal Poly came up with the concept for the technology. As the Biomedical Engineering Society was working on this competition, and instead of building what the Gates Foundation asked for, he said, well, why would you do it that way, this balloon tamponade concept? Why don't we just apply vacuum to the uterus to collapse it down? And that was really the beginning. And I met him through a lot of through a competition on campus, run through, so that was.
So neither you nor your co-founder have a medical background at all?
Not medical. My co-founder is a biomedical engineer.
Oh, okay.
He had about 15 years. He was not that student. He had about 15 years experience in the medical device industry at startups.
So you said, I think 2011 to 2016 to kind of develop that whole, the concept, the MVP, animal trials, human trials, talking to OBGYNs. Maybe kind of run down, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced in doing that?
Oh, wow. I mean, a lot of the challenges that every startup has, right? Like everything from, how do you build a team when you don't have any money, so all of that basic stuff. I think specific to our startup, there's a lot more focus now on women's health and specifically, maternal health in the United States now than there was even in 2011 and 2015 even. And so getting funders to think that it was getting funders based here that weren't looking at emerging markets to think it was a problem here was hard. And that's changed dramatically in the last 5 years or so, I would say. But we had to convince people. Mm-hmm. So I would say that was probably one of the biggest challenges to start.
So you're the CEO, correct? Or are you still the CEO?
No, yeah. So I'm the founding CEO. I started 2011, and then we hired a CEO to come in 2016. And I remained on the executive team for several years until we closed our Series B round mid 2018. And I've slowly been I was doing consulting projects, and now I'm an advisor and still advise on an occasional basis.
Okay. So it's pretty well known that the female CEOs typically get a small percentage of venture capital. I think it's something like 2.7%. So I'm curious if you have any tips or words of wisdom you can impart about how, as a female CEO, you went out and you've raised a Series B already, so you've raised some serious money. What were the keys to success in doing that?
I think there's no silver bullet, and I don't know. I think one of the things that always worked for us is we have always been incredibly passionate about this, and everyone that's ended up investing has believed in the vision of being able to provide this technology, not only in the United States, but around the world. The burden of mortality is not here. The burden of mortality is in emerging markets. And, you know, this technology is inexpensive enough to develop that it could put a serious dent in that mortality around the world. And at the end of the day, that's been key to our mission and where we ultimately want to see the technology. And so everyone that has invested has believed in that, which is really, really important, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but our vision and our passion has always been incredibly clear. And on top of that, you have to have everything together. You have to know that you have a market and that there's actually going to be a return. You have to know what your development pathway looks like and be prepared, just like any other startup would. But I think what actually hooks people for this is the heartstrings of what it could do.
It's I was just thinking it's playing to the social impact of the device.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering if that was part of your strategy in finding investors that really resonated with social impact more than just the bottom line. So some people may only care about the bottom line, how much 10x or 100x returns are they going to get, but some might have a more the social impact of it might sway their decision to invest in you more than some others might. Did you find that to be the case and kind of target those people when pitching to them?
Yeah, I think we had varying success with that. In 2013, when we raised our first money, social venture capital, that whole social capital, that was fairly new, right? I don't know. I'm not quite sure how to answer your question, but I would say, like, at the end of the day, like, having alignment with an investor that knows that that's ultimately what you want to see happen with the technology is super important. And I would say that we did end up, targeting some investors that had that as a part of their criteria set. So the Series B, the lead for the Series B is GHIF, the Global Health Investment Fund. And they operate like a normal VC, but they have an additional set of criteria that looks at what impact the technology or the company can have in low and middle income countries. So they have that added set of criteria. So that's a perfect partner for the company because at the end of the day, they want to see a return. All the investors want to see a return. However, the company's actually now, with that term sheet, required to go take this technology to low and middle income countries, which is great.
All right, so switching gears a little bit, you said you came from Sacramento, you were in the Bay Area for a bit, you're back. So you've been at Sac State now for a little bit. What is your take on the Sacramento startup scene?
Yeah, so I have, I guess, three different places that I've been in startup scenes. So San Luis Obispo, when I was a student, and for a couple years afterwards, that's where this company got its start. The Bay Area, and now here in Sacramento. And Sacramento, I have to say, I'm super encouraged by everyone that I've met. Everyone is just so happy to help here, and really a lot of like genuine people. And I very much appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that the Sacramento startup scene isn't trying to be the Bay Area startup scene. That doesn't work for most places, and it shouldn't work for most places, because you really want to elevate what's good about Sacramento. And I feel like the community here really believes that, and I think that's awesome.
Okay, so it's a little earlier than planned, but I think I'm ready to turn it over to the Q&A to the audience portion of the event, only 5 minutes early. So Laura, Cameron, do we have some questions in the queue lined up that people are wanting to ask?
Yeah, there's a couple. So this is from Paul Sappis. Did you get to serve underdeveloped countries with revenues from developed countries? Is that why it would be unwise to skip FDA approval, even though it's probably not required in third world countries?
Yeah, those are both really good questions. From a regulatory standpoint, being able to control the clinical environment for the first studies is really important. So making sure that we have data for the FDA that mimics a US-based hospital setting is incredibly important. And mixing that with cases from outside of the United States can just make that approval process really complicated. So that's the thought process behind getting the FDA approval before servicing any other market. There's lots more to that, but I'll just leave it there. And then, yeah, so at the end of the day, I think what will end up happening is there'll be a global version of the device that is less expensive and designed for settings that don't have as many resources. And those settings can include, midwife delivery centers where they don't have power all the time, so they don't have a source of vacuum all the time. Or, they're going to reuse the technology, which would never happen here. And so things like that. So a simple design kind of process that makes the device affordable and appropriate for low-income settings. And that is what would be ultimately available in the global marketplace.
Okay, Arlene has a question. You want to ask that, Arlene?
Sure. Am I unmuted? I am.
You're good to go.
Hi, Jessie. I wondered, I know you had a role in the development of the Cal Poly Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. I wondered if you could describe how they supported your entrepreneurial journey.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So when I graduated from Cal Poly in 2011, just as Cal Poly's Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship was starting. And so my first job out of school was actually working for that center. And I feel incredibly lucky that I was able to have a full-time job and be able to feed myself and work on the concept. At the time, it was, a sketch on a napkin. And all of the programs that I was working on were supporting my business, which was great. And I was also using my business as a guinea pig for understanding what programs I was building. So it was really a match made in heaven in a lot of ways, because I got the support I needed for my startup. And I was, also the target market for what the center was trying to build. So it was, and I still, that community is still fantastic, and we support each other still. So it's great. Yeah.
So Heather's next, and then Ryan.
Okay.
Hi, Jessie. That's really awesome that you guys are addressing this. I know mother mortality rate is huge with birth, especially in America. And I learned a lot through yoga recently, actually, from a yogi who practices pregnancy yoga. Have you guys looked at the science behind that? To I know it would, of course, take away from the need for your device, but helping people to know that that science within themselves to prevent that device from even being needed. I'm sure you're going to make hand over fist, of course, because of the need for it in the world right now, but that need is directly because of that lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I guess we haven't looked into specifically, yoga and how it relates to maternal mortality and morbidity rates. But I would say that education is so incredibly important in terms of, everything from prenatal care to, what's important to know going into becoming pregnant, being pregnant, delivery, postnatal care, all of that. And I think it's really important to make sure that education is there. Because if people are educated, then they can get the help they need when they need it. I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but I think that, increasing that education is very important.
Well, I'd love to connect you with those resources, so I'll shoot that over to you.
Thanks.
Yeah, no doubt.
I want to break in here. Just a quick housekeeping. If you've got a question, it's better to raise your hand by clicking the raise hand icon than type it into chat. Otherwise, we might miss it. We kind of skipped over Josh Middlebrook's question.
But I was going to let Ryan ask his question.
Okay. Ryan and then Josh after that. Okay.
So Ryan, go ahead.
Sounds good. Thanks, Laura. And Jessie, thanks for presenting. I wanted to follow up on the question from earlier that was asked about the Sacramento region ecosystem. If you were to have started your company knowing what you know about the Sacramento region ecosystem in Sacramento, so if you would have started your company in Sacramento, what unique challenges or opportunities do you think that you would have seen relative to what you experienced in the other ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I'm fully know the answer to that question. I would say if I were to start, a medical-based startup of some sort, I would want to get a lot more involved in the Davis ecosystem. I know there's a lot going on there. So I'm not totally familiar with what's going on there. So I guess I will say that the thing that the Bay Area has going for it, for the med device space in particular, is that a lot of the people who work in that space work on the peninsula. You don't need to be on the peninsula to have a med tech startup, for sure, but a lot of the really great talent is there. But then again, on the other hand, they're really expensive. We were able to have, we started in San Luis Obispo, and we found great talent in San Luis Obispo. And if I were to do it all over again, I think we could have done it from SLO the whole time, or from a place like here, Sacramento, the whole time. But that's, probably not as a first-time founder in a space that I was learning as I was going through it. Mixed bag, I guess.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Josh, you're up.
Okay, yeah. Hi, thanks for sharing. Just had a question about that time period between 2011 and 2013.
Yeah.
I was wondering how much time you were spending on this idea, like percentage per day, and then how did you stay motivated and keep the team motivated for 2 years, pre-revenue, pre-funding, all of that?
Yeah. Well, I was working full-time, but luckily what I was doing full-time directly overlapped with my startup. So I would say that I was definitely burning the midnight oil for Impress and Alydia Health. But also like being able to spend time during my general workday working on it too. So, and my co-founder was actually working for the Small Business Development Center as a consultant at the time. So we managed to keep ourselves afloat financially, personally. And from the start, we always wanted to make sure that we as people were healthy and happy and functioning well in our lives. So that was really important. Really like a strong focus on that work-life balance, even early on as a startup, which I don't know that many startups really focus on. And that kept our founding team together. And I would say the last thing is that, we all really cared about the mission. We all really still care about the mission and want to see that happen. And that united us, and it united us in the tough times and the fun times. So.
Okay. So Brad is next, and then Dolores.
Okay, thanks. Hey, Jessie. Question for you on the capital raising part of it, because as a med tech company, like you're going through it right now with the long development cycle and trying to get FDA approvals. So I'm curious the perspectives of the VCs that you talk to, like how their view of the med tech investment sort of works for them. because the returns are longer and it's not, a rapid growing software company where it's going to, triple in size and that type of stuff. So were these sort of longer term funds with a different return profile, or were they just a typical VC fund that you kind of had to convince that this was a good idea to invest in?
Yeah, great question. The majority of our investors were either, like I said, really focused on the impact aspect of it. That's what brought them in at the end of the day. So most impact investors also have longer timelines because they understand that being able to do something in Uganda, for instance, is going to take a lot longer than it will here. So that's one answer to the question. The other answer is that we pretty much only spoke to investors who were medtech investors or impact investors. Outside of course, angels and high net worth individuals who have less of an investment profile per se.
Yeah, I got it. Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
Loris, your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie. First of all, I've had the privilege of being able to get part of the office hours and get Jessie's great advice. So I recommend that to anybody in terms of what the Carlsen Center provides and what Jessie provides. But I also have a question, Jessie. So one of the challenges that I have is to put together a team when you have no money. And so that's the basis of my question is, how were you able to put together that talent that you talked about I'm assuming that as a college student, you didn't have the finances to be able to, pay people. How did you go about doing that? Because I'm finding that to be, a real impediment for me. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. First of all, I worked with people that I liked, and we would work on projects together. And if they, fell in love with this thing, then they wanted to be along for the ride. And if they didn't, then that was fine too. And so, our early employees kind of evolved in that way before we had any money to pay anyone. And we found them just by being active in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Pretty much every single one of our early partners, early employees was an introduction of a friend kind of thing. And so, you work with someone, you see if you're good working together, and then there's a point where you sit down and you have a beer or whiskey and you say, okay, are you in this? Like, what does it look like? And then you're just, working on this thing for 8 years. But that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
No, you did. Thank you. So basically spread your net pretty wide and just find people who are, who have a passion for what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Chris Anderson is next.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm curious, having deep experience in working in the SLO startup community, what could the community in Sacramento learn from your experience in SLO?
Oh, good question. I'm not sure. I think one of the things that is super important in building startup community is just understanding that every part of the startup community is important and each has its own piece to play. And the more that we can all elevate each of those pieces of the community, the better off it'll be as a whole. And, once you start doing that, it gains its own momentum. And I think that's happening at the Carlsen Center. Cameron's done such an incredible job. And I see it happening in this community, and that's really cool.
Hey, Cameron, you're next.
Thanks. I couldn't raise my hand either, but so question regarding like advising and mentorship. So I know we have a number of people who play advisory roles here and, our ecosystem builders. What were you looking for in an early stage advisor or mentor as a, entrepreneur kicking off, and how can we, build that from the Sacramento lens?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, because as a young entrepreneur, when you're introduced to advisors or mentors, understanding whether they're a mentor, an advisor, a board member, so understanding like what that relationship really is not something that's really natural for a lot of students to understand right off the bat. So being really upfront with why you're interested in helping a community member can be really helpful. And all of those roles are absolutely necessary for young startups, right? They need the mentors to go to say like, I have this sticky problem that I don't really want to tell anyone about, but how should I deal with it? And they need the practice of, standing in front of an advisory board and giving a presentation and a pitch and being professional and being able to do all of that. And I think the important thing to keep in mind is just that helping students understand what that looks like and what that means and how to model that behavior is really important.
Cool.
Thanks, Jessie.
I don't see a raised hand or a note, so I'm going to ask a question. So you started this company when you were still in the college or university community, is that right?
Yes.
And then at some point, you were weaned from that. Was that a hard transition for you and your team to move outside of what I would consider probably a very supportive community to kind of the cold, hard world of Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I would say it was a hard transition for all the reasons you might imagine. But it was also a fantastic transition because it was what we needed next. And so it was really exciting so we went from, San Luis Obispo, and we applied and were accepted to the Fogarty Institute, which is an incubator specifically for medical technologies. And so that's where we got a lot of our learning about the industry as a whole. And that's exactly what we needed at that point in time. So, it was, I love slow. So like personally, it was hard too, because I didn't really want to leave. But it was also incredibly exciting. And, I cared so much about what we were doing that it was all worth it.
Okay, great. Harsh, you get the next question. You have to unmute.
Yeah, thanks. I couldn't find that icon. First of all, congratulations for your medical device, and great to know about it. So I have two quick questions. First one is, does your device have like software processes to integrate into various health and fitness apps for mobile devices? Like these fitness apps are becoming so popular to create user experiences for mobile devices. Is that relevant? Does the ability to have app read and write health and activity data to health systems, exist? Or is there a vision to become like a data source and deliver informed health and fitness info and things like that? And the second question is just maybe, is your team distributed all in one place? What kind of challenges are you facing with the current situation?
Yeah. Okay. So the first question is there a digital aspect to the technology?
Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would say no, pretty much. It's a medical grade silicone device that you hook up to vacuum. Of course, for all of our clinical studies, we're collecting data for the studies themselves. And but I would say in the traditional health tech sense, there's not really an application there that we're focused on at the moment. And I don't see that happening in the future. Currently I can only speak to the challenges that that I know of as an advisor to the company. But I know that we are very, very thankful that we were able to enroll all of the 107 patients for our clinical study, our US-based clinical study before all of this started. because many of the clinical research departments shifted all of their resources to fighting COVID. So we're very lucky from that perspective to have been able to finish that. And from a funding perspective, it's difficult. They were able to raise another round just recently, but it's tough. Like it's not as easy. So.
Yeah, well, congratulations too. Awesome.
Thank you.
Great job. Thanks.
All right. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, it looks like they're Chris Miller.
Christine and Heather both do.
Hi, Jesse. I want to pick up on a thread that Jeff introduced earlier when he asked about being a female entrepreneur. The medical device industry is, I would venture to guess, pretty male dominated. So I guess I want to kind of ask you a feminist question. What's it like being a female CEO and being someone in the startup community as a female trying to raise this capital and get your feet underneath you when it's, the literature suggests that women tend not to be the biggest, their own champions as much as men. They don't command the space as much as men do. And so I would just offer as the framing that there might be some challenges that you had as a woman that might not have been the same as a man in that kind of industry. And I'm just curious what your strategies were in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I would definitely say that there were some difficulties in raising funding from a couple perspectives. One, I was really, really young, first time CEO, raising money early on, female as well, and also raising money for a women's health device. And Chris, you're totally right. The majority of investors in this space are older white men, which for the more sophisticated investors isn't really an issue because they can take a look at it and, see and understand the value of the investment. But I will say that a lot of investors invest in something that they personally understand, right? So I had one particular investor tell me that his group wouldn't be interested because it wasn't like a knee replacement or something that their brother-in-law had a knee replacement, so they got that and they just didn't get this. So like I had moments like that for sure. That one blew me away. I literally didn't know what to say to him. I was like, you came from a uterus. Like everyone came from a uterus. But I had moments like that. And I guess the tools that I needed in order to continue raising in that atmosphere, one, just knowing that people like that I was never going to raise money from. And I'm not going to take that to heart, and I'm just going to keep going. So getting a really thick skin, but also understanding that I needed to take feedback because that there were common themes among all those audiences that I needed to address, even if I didn't think I needed to address them. So that was one strategy. And I would say the other strategy is when I needed it, I got validation from other people. So instead of putting myself forward as, with that validation, I'd have other people prop me up. So getting into the Fogarty Institute gave us a lot of credibility. Having Dr. Fogarty invest personally in our company gave us a ton of credibility. So really being able to lean on those things, even if they were going to look at me and not feel that credibility, being able to do that really, really helped.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, we've got a question from Heather.
Yeah, so thanks, Laura and StartupSac. Jesse, you said that this started from a Gates competition. Did they just drop that? I mean, wouldn't that be a good source of funding? I mean, are they still interested, or how'd that go?
Yeah, so the competition specifically, I guess it was PATH. It was a subsidy, one of the funded, it's not important. But the outcome of that competition is actually being used in emerging markets today. So the winner of that competition essentially adapted inexpensive common items to recreate a balloon tamponade. So that's actually being used in Kenya and other places today. So that's really cool. And the Gates Foundation does still do a lot of granting and investing. And I should say the Gates Foundation is actually a limited partner in the Global Health Investment Fund. So the VC that ended up investing this in the Series B round, the Gates is a partial partner in that.
So you guys already have a competitor in Kenya, essentially, then? Or it's different?
It's different. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we have time for one last question. I don't see anything in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised. So
You get the last question.
I get the last question. What do I? What's next for you, Jessie?
That was going to be my question too.
Oh, that's why we think. That's why we're business partners. You want to ask it? You ask it.
So, what's next for you, Jessie? You're obviously pretty young. You can't just retire off of this. What do you got planned for?
Definitely can't just retire off of this. Yeah, so I'm having a blast as an entrepreneur in residence at the Carlsen Center. And I plan on doing that until I don't know, as long as Cameron wants me. I'm having a lot of fun.
I like that.
I'm having a lot of fun working with students and helping build out the Sacramento ecosystem. And I don't know, we'll see. I think the last year or so, frankly, I've been kind of resting. It's been a long haul. So resting, recovering, getting my brain working again the last, since I started working at the Carlsen Center, and we'll see. If somebody has a great idea, let me know. I want to talk about it.
All right. Well, so first, thank you for coming on with us, and thank you, both of you, Cameron and Jessie, for coming on and hosting and partnering with this. And if people have additional questions for you, Jessie or Cameron, or about Alydia Health, for you, Jessie or Cameron, what's the best way for people to contact you guys?
Go for it, Jessie.
Yeah, I guess you can email me. My email's on the Carlsen Center website. There's office hours as well if you have something you want to discuss, and I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, ditto that. On the website's the best way. We have our office hours, so we have Calendly links to lock in time with us there, and then our calendar of events. And I'll be posting our toolkit series in the chat as well. But thank you, Jeff and Laura, for the opportunity to partner on this, and look forward to continuing to work together in the ecosystem. So thanks for all that you both do.
Likewise, same back at you. Really looking forward to working with you guys more as well.